From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, Terry Manning, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. And although my guest was born a Sooner and then metamorphosized into a Longhorn, he made his name as one of the premier engineers and mixers in the world. Although you may not recognize his $1,000,000 face or smooth as butter voice, this week's guest's name has been attached to dozens of gold and multi-platinum charting hit records from a genre of music, from multiple genres of music, I could say, over the last 30 plus years. When Mr. Terry Manning isn't in the studio, you may find him out and about capturing photographs of what the average eye passing it by may not see. It is both my highest honor and privilege to welcome Terry Manning as our guest on the program. Sir Terry, how are you today?
Oh, great, Nolan. Great to see you, hear you, and great to be here.
Well, of course, and I'm so glad to speak to you on all things that involve your career and the experiences that you've been a part of. So it's always kind and very respectful of those who want to take the time to do this. I mentioned some of the things that and some of the success you've had, and although you've worked in the studio behind the scenes, bring this music to life, you've also, created your own music and played as well as I'm sure you still play to this day to an extent. So for you, seeing the music world from both perspectives and participating in both sides, what's it like as a music fan, but also professional in the area to see music enjoyed physically again in person?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big question. It's all just tons of fun for me. I just have always loved music, starting from a tiny child all up to today, to an old whatever I am. But I love to go see it. I love to play live, sing, play, be in the studio. Of course, I like good music. I prefer
Sure,
things I like to things I don't like. There's some things everyone doesn't like everything, but
sure.
it's just a fun thing to be. And I find over the industry and over the years, there's just a very special camaraderie to all people related in the music business. There's a you kind of your brothers in arms, so to speak.
Sure,
From the minute you meet somebody for a new session, there's something there between you. It's always like that.
of
And I
course.
know for years I many years ran an owned Compass Point studio in Nassau, Bahamas, and because of that, I had a lot of clients always coming to record there. And I'd speak to them on the phone. I'd set up the sessions. We'd get it all planned. They would come in, and I would always go to meet them at the airport. Never one time did I fail to recognize who the client was just when they walked through, because they're music people. They look different, they
Sure.
act different. There's just a thing about them.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's a
that's
distinctive quality,
it is.
definitely. Well, hopefully during the last few years, this has all given us a time of reflection and learning things about ourselves that I didn't know prior. So for Terry Manning, what is one thing he learned about himself that I didn't know prior to the last 3 years?
Wow, myself. Huh. Well, it's always hard to think what I've learned for myself because I'm always looking and listening to other things, or dealing with the people that I'm dealing with in the studio. But I guess what you mean is with the pandemic and
Yeah,
everything changing the way life has been for everybody. And I think we meaning just as a society, haven't really gone back to what it used to be
sure.
before. Everyone's still a little cautious, a little scared. Uh, we learned to be alone a lot more. All of a sudden, I stopped going into studios. Uh, my whole career, life, whatever, was spent, unless it was doing the photographic things and music things, was going into recording studios, meeting other people, doing their music or them doing music with me, whatever, and just being in either a studio of my own, such as Compass Point or others that I've owned, or going to an outside studio or rental place. You're just in a special atmosphere. Of course, I'm in a control room here of my own, so it's still that atmosphere. But all of a sudden, you were all by yourself. Everything was over the internet. I was still mixing and mastering things for people, but I didn't get to meet them, didn't get to see them in person. You could meet them like this over a Zoom call or something and talk through things, but it's just not the same. So I guess we all, and me included, learned a little introspection over the 2 or 3
Sure.
years of it, of just thinking. I did some recordings of my own that I haven't done anything with them yet, but I will. And I called them the sofa sessions because I decided, okay, I'm by myself here. Well, of course, I have a family, my wife and son and all of our animals, but it's still no outsiders. So I would sit on the sofa in my family room, where the TV is, with one mic and a laptop, and say, well, I can record with this. I don't have to be in a big studio. I did 2 or 3 songs on the sofa sessions,
There you
and
go.
I will release one of those this year probably.
Well, I'll be
You
looking forward
just
to listening
learn,
to that.
yeah, it's fun.
Well, speaking, especially the other music that I was able to check out of your own, very, very, not just a good musician, but a good singer as well. Reading
Oh,
some of the
thanks.
stories in your bio, not just on your website, but the interviews you've done on this platform and others, knowing of the story of your father and having his own radio show and joining him in the studio and seeing all the equipment and seeing how it worked and records and all those sort of things. Do you remember that first moment where you realized that this was your path down to take, besides maybe heading down the road with Bobby Fuller?
Yeah, I guess it was meeting and knowing Bobby Fuller in El Paso, Texas. For those of you who don't know, that Bobby Fuller was a local star in El Paso. He had his own nightclub. He had his own record labels. He, as a kid, I mean, he's 17, 18, 19, 20 years old doing these things all on his own. And I thought he was a big international star at that time, growing up in El Paso here, as I did at that time, because he was on our local radio.
Sure.
When you hear that, you don't know if it's on the radio in New York or Seattle or Detroit, Chicago, whatever. You just
Sure.
know where you are when you're a kid. So to me, he was as big as the Beatles later
Sure.
were. He was the big thing. So I guess when I first went to a junior high dance, junior high school, at probably 13 or 14 years old, maybe even 12, I don't know, but and it so happened that Bobby Fuller's band was the band playing there. And for those who, I was going to say, those who don't know, he later had, later than the El Paso times, had world international #1 hit records, especially I Fought the Law, which most people know. It's still heard on oldies stations and it sounds fantastic and just a great record. But to go to a dance with your other classmates in junior high school and see a band for the first time, with drums and amps and electric guitars and microphones and a PA. I'd never seen that, and just go, wow, it really was a life-changing moment to hear that sound come out with the pounding bass and
Sure.
drums and everything. And my idol already from the radio standing there singing. I'm just, wow, this is obviously what I want to do. So that would be my first moment of, yeah, okay, I've always liked records. I loved Elvis, I loved Buddy Holly, whatever, but hearing this thing live, this thing coming at you and over you and standing right next to loud rock and roll sound, that just changed everything for me.
Well, I'm sure for you that was your first, if not one of your first, awestruck moments where you're trying to find your composure immediately. Because later on, you at that same concert, you would go up to him and you would ask to play with him, and you'd play, I believe, a Buddy Holly song, if not 2 Buddy Holly songs during that concert. What I really admire about you, Terry, is that you had the stones at 15 years old to storm into Stax Records and say, I want to do A to Z here at the studio. I want to play, I want to engineer, I want to songwrite, and all this fun jazz before they tell you, oh, you come back when you're 18. And that moment, I mean, obviously you're playing this out, you're thinking, okay, I want to do this, that, and the other. But how much of you had a backup plan if this all failed in terms of music at that age?
Oh, there was no backup plan. This was it. Of course, then you're still going to school. I mean, I
Sure.
was just into high school by the time you're talking about being in Memphis and that Stax, going into Stax Records. But I guess I just didn't have the common sense to know that you can't do those things. You can't go up to Bobby Fuller at a concert and say, "Hey, can you sing a song with me? Can I play?" That's crazy as a kid. And then to walk into Stax Records, I mean, I can look back now and just think, what kind of dummy are you to think you
Sure.
can do that? people would come up to me at that age and ask, "Can I do this?" I would probably try to be nice, but I would say, "Come back years later, get some experience, whatever." But somehow, everybody that I came up to, Bobby Fuller, into Stax Records, which turned out to be Steve Cropper, the guy
Yeah.
who welcomed me in. Thank you, Steve. Uh, is I don't know if I would be that nice. They were so welcoming
Sure.
and kind, and I don't know if they saw anything or just I pestered them too much or what it was.
Yeah.
But I guess I had no shame, you know.
Sure.
Maybe I still don't. I don't know.
It's a situation of what do you have to lose? At least you went out there and tried and
Well,
showed the initiative.
true, true, true. I didn't think of it like that, but I just thought, hey, I'm doing this. Off we
Yeah.
go.
And we talked briefly about Bobby Fuller, and I was also interested in curious and not surprised, but amazed at the fact that back then when you're growing up, there was such an easy, no, I shouldn't say easy, but to an extent, an easy access to communicating with musicians and stars of that magnitude, whereas nowadays it's much more difficult. They have fan mail, people to check in with that sort of stuff. So for a young kid like yourself, besides playing with him that one night at your school dance, to have had such a long communication, whether it be on the phone or written with him, and him being such an idol and father figure and extent to you, what was that like?
That was very special. I can easily call him my very first music mentor because I after that dance where I went up to him and said, "Can I sit in with you?" Whatever. He was always so kind. Instead of saying, "Kid, please, I'm tired. We're playing our set here. This is our break," but he just, "Sure, come on." And he gave me his phone number, and I started calling him up. Then I went over to his house, which, by the way, was on Album Avenue in El Paso. I always thought that, wow, he lives on Album Avenue, but how that happened, I don't know. But I would just be able to ask him any number of questions. How do you write a song? I would watch him recording, and he had a fantastic. We call it a home studio, but for that era, I'm talking the '60s. For that era, there wasn't such a thing as a high-end home studio like there might be now. I mean,
Sure.
the fantastic control room I'm in now is attached to my home,
Yeah.
but and a lot of people have excellent studios in their where they live.
Sure.
But then, no, nothing like that. But he had Ampex tape recorders, he had Telefunken microphones, he had built a reverb chamber underground, an echo chamber. So I mean, it was a real deal. So I would go over there and be able to see him doing these things, pushing the buttons, positioning the microphones, talking to the other band members, and I could ask questions about it. What an incredible opportunity is that?
Sure.
See somebody with excellent equipment, top of the line equipment. He had a radio board console like they would have at a radio station that would run the microphones through to get to the tape recorder.
Uh,
So these are things that very few people had except professional radio stations or studios. But he had it in his house
hmm,
and would set up his den. And his talk about parents that are supportive. His parents were very supportive.
sure.
He said, "Come on, the band's going to practice, or we're going to record." They'd move the furniture back, he'd set all the stuff up, just taken over the house.
Yeah.
He and his brother Randy, his fantastic bass player Randy. But so that was just an unbelievable mentorship opportunity. And I later got an even more incredible one through Steve
Yeah.
Cropper's at Stax to be able to walk into at 15, late 15, early 16 years old, to walk into a professional recording
Hmm,
studio having hit records on the Billboard charts with what turned out to be, I mean, we didn't all know it at the time, but what turned out to be some of the greatest musicians in recording history in
sure.
Booker T and the MGs, Duck Dunn, Al Jackson, Booker T, Steve Cropper, the Memphis Horns, Isaac Hayes, on and on. Incredible
Hmm,
musicianship. But to all of a sudden be sitting there as a kid, a little kid,
sure.
watching and learning people of this magnitude, I can't give all these people and many more that I haven't even mentioned such huge thanks and credit for to whatever I learned and wherever I got. these great people were there for me to be a sponge and soak some of it in.
Sure. Well, it's a moment you probably think that if it weren't for that, your progression through the music industry would have taken a different path, if not maybe even slower, because later on there at Stax, you would come back when you're older. I think it was Steven, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, gave you that job in the tape room where you're, doing tapes for other people that needed them for certain projects, where then one day someone comes looking into the tape room and they find you and they need your just a body to be the engineer for that session because the person called out. In a moment like that, before getting the favor or asked the favor to do that, when you're tasked with working in the tape room, I'm sure you weren't expecting that in terms of your musical career aspect. So when that was given to you and you started working in the tape room, was that at all at that point sort of a kick in the gut in the sense of slowing you down music progression wise, or were you just happy to just be involved?
Oh, at that age and at that time, I was super happy to be involved. And what I was doing was making tape copies.
Sure.
They had several tape machines, and they would have a mix they would have done, and they'd need it copied to be for a take-home version or to copy a 15 IPS version to send overseas from copy safety master or something like that. So I was just copying tapes. That's
Sure.
no big deal. It takes a little bit of knowledge of the tape machines, but you don't have to know a whole lot of engineering, yet to do that. You have to get the levels right, not too hot so it distorts, not too low so there's tape noise, that sort of thing. But all of a sudden to be just ask, oh, there's somebody hasn't shown up in the big studio. Can you run down there and push some buttons? So okay, and fortunately I was in that place, Stack Studio,
Sure.
and I was able to watch other people. When I wasn't copying tapes, I'd walk down the hall, I'd peek in the door, I'd very discreetly and quietly, get it to the back of the room and observe, watch what people were doing. Don't
Sure.
ask questions, don't make a nuisance of yourself. You can ask questions later, when you're one on one against somebody,
Sure.
but you don't interrupt a session. So I would just peek and learn what I could. So I had some idea. And as you mentioned earlier, I had seen my father in a radio studio turning on a microphone, getting a level, doing any EQ that might be needed or something special for a radio broadcast. So I knew a little bit, and I had operated home tape machines, Wallensack, Webcore, 3M type machines of the day. People had 7.5, 7-inch reel machines, So I had learned enough that I went in, pushed a couple of buttons, nothing happened. A couple of more buttons, oh, something happened. There was sound. Hit record. Okay, you're an engineer.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, but if they think you are, you got to learn more quick, and that's
Sure.
just what you do. You stay there as long as you can. You absorb all you can, and you just keep going. And I was just very, very lucky so many times in my so-called career and life to be around a learning place with great people and just be able to take advantage of it. I
Sure.
don't mean take advantage in a bad way, but
No, yeah,
to
sure.
learn from it and try to utilize those skills.
Speaking of, we talked about Bobby Fuller and how much of an impact and relationship you had with him, but there's another person you would meet later on, um, that had probably, if not as close to as much of a relationship you had with them, being Jimmy Page later on with Led Zeppelin, and of course starting out with the Yardbirds, who you would open up for with your group, if I'm not mistaken, Lawson and Four More on
Yeah.
The Dick Clark Caravan of Stars tour. That aspect being your one of your favorite groups at the time, the Yardbirds. We just talked about nerves in the studio, but nerves of meeting these people backstage as a young musician, not that same level. Balancing that, but also potentially looking for maybe a way to work with them. Was there ever that element in those times, or were you just in the moment experiencing it all?
Yeah, in the moment kind of thing. On the as far as the Yardbirds, when you play at all on a show. Now, you mentioned the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars. We weren't stars. We were a local band, and we weren't even on the caravan. We were just opening up a local
Yeah,
show where the caravan stopped. But as long as you're on the bill, you are professional. You have access to backstage.
sure.
Nobody even the big groups at the time, the Yardbirds. Other people on that show were Jerry Lewis and the Playboys, who had a couple of big hits, This Diamond Ring and some other things. They don't poo-poo you. Stay back. Don't
Sure.
leave us. You're not in the business, because you are in the business. You're there.
Yeah.
You're playing. You've got your instrument, and you're setting up and doing all the things you do. So it just was a natural thing to go up to the guys in the biggest group. In my mind at the time, the Yardbirds, and of course the Beatles were the big group,
Yeah.
the big group, but the Yardbirds are right up there for me. I love the Yardbirds, still do, and just go up to them and talk, and just get something out of it. And to meet Jimmy Page, and then I came back when they came back, the Yardbirds, for another tour. Not this tour, but the next time they came, I went to those shows, a couple of those shows as well, and went back and said hi, and they kind of remember you, from
Yeah.
before. But went up to Jimmy Page and just start talking, and that was easy, because I could say to Jimmy Page, "Hi, I'm with Stax Records in Memphis. I'm with Ardent Studio in Memphis. I have a studio where we work and do all these things." And you're one-on-one all of a sudden, even
Sure.
though he's obviously at a much higher level than I would ever be. Still you're a music person talking to a music person. So we became friends, and would correspond by mail, at that time, over the years. And then of course he'd have me work with them on the Led Zeppelin III album
Sure.
a few years later. So just amazing times. And it's funny. I think the key point in all of this, from your questioning and my answering, was that one thing leads to another.
Sure.
And if you're a wallflower and scared to get involved, you're probably not going to lead to the next thing.
Sure.
But if you just are nice, you're not pushy, you're just kind of normal, one-on-one normal to somebody in a decent way, and not trying to get something out of it,
Sure.
become friends and things. They just naturally lead to a next thing, it seems.
Sure. Now, of course, Jimmy Page was part of the Yardbirds, but of course there was Jeff Beck as well. And as of a few weeks ago, it's been 6 months since Jeff Beck unfortunately passed away in January of 2023. If he was there at that point when you first saw him at that first concert, what do you want to remember him as, seeing as this time has passed, of such a legendary musician in person?
Wow. Well, you can't get much better or more legendary or anything than Jeff Beck. Of course, we're talking about Jimmy Page as well. And
Sure.
so another okay guitarist that was in their band was a guy named Eric Clapton. So there's some
okay.
pretty decent guitarists that came out of the Yardbirds. But
Yeah.
Jeff Beck, boy, was he special. He was very intelligent guy. All of these people are extreme.
Sure.
I find over my interaction with people and the many groups I've worked with and whatever, that the biggest stars and the highest level of musicianship people that you meet, that they have reached, are usually incredibly intelligent
Sure.
people. Jimmy Page is a brilliant genius. Jeff Beck, very smart. Billy Gibbons, couldn't get any smarter. I
Sure.
mean, just amazingly together and smart people. But with Jeff, when I did hook up with Jimmy really backstage at the later tour, and really start to befriend him, and we'd talk and meet and start hanging out in the studio and things, Jeff had just left the band. He had
Okay.
just left the Yardbirds, but he had left his Esquire, Fender Esquire. That's the single pickup, like a Telecaster, but without the middle pickup or the second pickup. He had left that the kind of blonde pure wood Esquire. He left it with Jimmy, so Jimmy took over the guitar duties.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, he's trying to be in the shoes of Jeff Beck. Well,
Sure.
it sounds odd now to say it, but I remember Jimmy saying, to some extent, he's never lacked confidence, but saying to some extent, but also especially, the other Yardbird members, gosh, can Jimmy fill Jeff's shoes?
Sure.
Can he carry off being a lead guitarist? Well, that sounds ridiculous now.
Yeah.
Of course he can. And he was already one of the top session guitarists in London. But when you're trying to all of a sudden go into a place that Jeff Beck just left, that's a bit daunting, is it not?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, wow, because boy, Jeff could play anything and as good or better than anyone ever did it. And now there's Jimmy. Oh, I know I'm great. I know I'm good. And they were friends, of course, friends from childhood.
Sure.
All of these guys, so especially he and Jeff. So he knew he could do it, but still, I'm sure there's a little, wow, okay, I'm going to do that now. But
Yeah.
he certainly darn well did it.
Of
Did
course.
it
Yeah.
very well, and then turned it into Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. It's just it's an interesting perspective because then also Jeff, it's not as if he is a lead singer of the group. A lot of his songs, particularly in his solo career as well, are just the instrument playing. There's no lyrics. So to be phenomenal, but also have no real lyric aspect to the song is another feat in of itself. You know, not only Led Zeppelin III being one of the greatest albums of all time, platinum and gold in practically every market. There have been many other albums that have done that well as #1 feats that you've been a part of. But an aspect like that, Led Zeppelin III, because I'm sure for yourself, never can you expect to be part of something as legendary as that album, because you may be a part of a bunch of stuff that doesn't have that success. So to be part of an album like that, Led Zeppelin III, that does so well, and you're also friends with Jimmy Page, who's part of that album really closely. What was that like for you at that point in your life?
Well, obviously, it was extremely important to my career and an amazing personal time to be part of. And you are so right. You, as an engineer, a producer, everything you do is not a hit.
Sure.
In fact, it's a fairly small percentage. I've been pretty lucky in that a fair percentage of things I've worked on have done very well, but it's still, even the all-time greats, not me, I'm talking people who are really, really great, but still they work on a lot of things that aren't hits, things
Sure.
you've never heard of in the general public. And I certainly worked on my share of those. Now, I don't want to put down those musicians or those albums or whatever, because there's usually something great or good, very good in any project that makes it
Sure.
into a real studio. But everything doesn't get on the radio. Everything doesn't sell a million copies. A lot of it literally falls by the wayside. And to be honest, some of it is not that good. So we all work on all of those things. But to be in the studio with a Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, any of the guys in Zeppelin, or in any of the Booker T and EMGs, or later ZZ Top guys, Billy Gibbons, so many others, Lenny Kravitz, you could just go on and on.
Yeah.
It's a really special time. And it's hard to describe exactly, especially the Led Zeppelin III was somewhat early on in my career.
Yeah.
Although I'd done things for, by that time, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
So I've already done and worked on records that had been hits by that time. But all of a sudden, this is because they were already the #1 rock band in the
Sure.
world, unless you can't compare them to the Beatles.
Yeah.
But they had more or less, even in the NME and Melody Maker polls, they had taken over as the biggest
Sure.
rock band, took over where the Beatles were in the polling.
Yeah.
So they were already really, really big.
Yeah.
So to be in the studio with that level of an artist is awfully special. But having said that, if you go in as a fanboy, if you go in as, oh my God, this is going to be history. Oh my God, I'm working with big stars.
Sure.
You're not going to do your job properly, I
Sure.
don't think. And I just don't go into any session like that. I don't have an ego thinking I'm as good as them, so I'm just going to sit here and make them come to me. It's not like that.
Sure.
It's just you've got to be somewhat on the same level.
Sure.
You got to realize that you are there to work. You have a job. That
Yeah.
job is to get the best sounds possible on tape, or if you're an engineer, or if you're the producer, to get the best of the artist you're working with that they can be on the
Okay.
tape. And if you're the producer engineer, it's all of those things at once. So you just can't be overwhelmed by the moment. You
Sure.
can't let the this might be number one syndrome take over anything. You've got to do your job because it might very well flop.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
never. Now, another thing is every time you go in the studio, you better be thinking, this is good.
Yeah.
I'm doing a good job. These songs are good. This recording is good. It's being done the right way. Because if you're not thinking that, what the hell are you doing there in the first place?
Yeah.
Why did you rent a studio, pay for everything, bother to fly and get hotels and bring people and instruments and customs and whatever you have to go through to get
Sure.
a session going? Why do it all if you don't think you're going to do a good job? So you go in with confidence, but you don't go in to be overtaken by the star power of people.
Sure. Well, I'm sure also in your scenario and any other engineer or producer to begin with, maybe with Led Zeppelin, I mean, they have the album does great and they can tour for a long time with that, collect royalties, of course. They can sort of post to an extent off of that, even if it's not, even if it's only a brief time recording that album. Whereas yourself, you're probably looking for the next project to work on to pay the bills, to pay for food and
Oh yeah.
water and all for your family, that sort of thing. For you though, after that album, and maybe your phone was off the hook after that point with other projects, but how worried were you after that album ended in terms of looking for another project, regardless of how potentially successful it could be?
Well, I wasn't worried about it because I was actually employed at Ardent Studios.
Okay.
That's where we overdubbed and mixed Led Zeppelin III. Uh, I was employed there. I was the first employee. The great John Fry was the founder of Ardent Studios and had just put in this first professional for rent studio, commercial facility in Memphis. And I was the first employee of Ardent Studios. And so John was another mentor that I've learned great things from. He wasn't a musician like a lot of producer engineers are, but he was incredibly adept at engineering. He had studied it, he knew the science of it, and he was able to mentor me and other people and to relay the information he had learned from books mostly or from other people. He could pass it on. So again, working there and at Stax at the same time, I was in an incredible place, two
Sure.
incredible places. So I wasn't worried about what's next. I knew I have a paycheck, albeit at the time quite small,
Sure.
thinking back on it, but still, those were early times
Yeah.
and non-inflationary times. What I'm meaning is, what you were paid then sounds very small when it was really related to what the money's worth today.
Sure.
It's hard to say what I'm
No,
saying,
no,
but
no, yeah, yeah.
it was okay. You know,
Yeah, at the time you could make it by.
yeah, you made an okay salary, you paid your rent, you did whatever. So I wasn't worried about that. But unbeknownst to me, it was working on Led Zeppelin that led to the next big step in my career of another big group. Now, I'm still working on, at that time, on uh, uh, Rufus Thomas, Isaac Hayes, some mixing Otis Redding things with Steve Cropper, who was the main mixer, and the things that were going on, still working with great artists, but they weren't artists where I was a central focus.
Sure.
In other words, on when Zeppelin came in, Jimmy brought the Zeppelin thing in. I'm the engineer
Yeah.
of that project at that point. Andy Johns obviously had in England had pre-recorded the tracks and a lot of the things, but I was one of the engineers.
Yeah.
I would end up with an engineering credit on the album, which you didn't get at Stax at that time in most
Interesting.
places. Uh, so to become a part of the project in a slightly more intrinsic way was a big deal, but I didn't realize it at the time.
Sure.
So out there in the world listening to Led Zeppelin III as it became the number one album all over the world, and went gold and then platinum and doing all these things. And all over the radio, you would hear Immigrant Song and Since I've Been Loving You and things. Out there listening was Billy Gibbons, and he liked it. And he said, why does that sound better than what he perceived his albums were sounding? Why aren't we that big? So that led him to look for me, which is half of the reason that I ended up working on ZZ Top for 18 years. The other half was just to tell stories, because here we are. At that same time, I'm driving along in Memphis, headed to my apartment about midnight after a session, and listening to the radio. And the big station at the time was FM 100, which was the rock station, meaning not just top 40, but FM radio had just come into existence, where they played album cuts. They might even late at night play a whole album, but they weren't just playing the top 40 singles. They were playing deeper cuts, things that were more long. They played Inagata Davida, 18 minutes long or something, you know, the AM radio would never play. So I'm listening to the FM radio, and here comes Sure Got Cold After the Rain Fell by ZZ Top, off of their first album, I guess, or second album maybe. So I literally stopped the car, pulled off the side of the road to listen. Wow, what is this? Who is this singing? Who is this playing that guitar? I've got to find him. So kind of at the same time, he's hearing things I did and going, wow. And I'm hearing things he did and going, wow. And we're literally start looking for each other and end up hooking up. Well, that turns into Tres Hombres that I've worked with, ZZ Top, that zoomed forward and became their biggest album of the time, put them in a whole another level, and leads to 18 years of working on the biggest ZZ Top albums that they ever had, the big things, the big hits, culminating really, although we did one afterwards, but culminating in Eliminator, which is the zenith of their career. And of course, if you're doing that, working on other albums, or that, if you're working on albums that end up selling 20 million copies and go crazy all over the world with 5 hit singles off of Eliminator, and that it's going to lead to other work. So it's just doing something, doing it good enough to keep doing it with them and with other people. And if it leads to a big hit, you're going to get more things. And all of a sudden, by that time, a manager's looking for me, and I signed with a management company. Other acts are looking for me. Record labels are looking for me, because they think if you're involved in this big a hit, we want you, whether it's right or wrong. Sometimes it's the wrong thing. But so I got jobs almost immediately after Eliminator, with Jason and the Scorchers, Molly Hatchet. It led to Joe Cocker, lots and lots of things. And each of those that became a success led to the next thing. So crazy business. Success engenders more work and hopefully more success. Forgot what the question is now. So.
Oh, no worries. Well, that segues me perfectly into what I wanted to talk about, which of course is ZZ Top, which I could not ask you about. You mentioned Tres Hombres and Eliminator. First one celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and Eliminator celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. Of course, Eliminator, as you said, is one, not just their greatest hits albums, but one of the highest selling albums and most successful albums of all time out of any other artist. And for you, you mentioned it being part of it and the work that you got afterwards with your phone being on fire, I'm sure. We talked about Led Zeppelin and Zeppelin III, how that does and being part of it and what led from that. But those two albums being a completely different stratosphere with those artists in ZZ Top, what was that in terms of being able to fathom the success that came with it, but also realizing that, okay, I can breathe a little bit better. I can, not stress so much about making sure I'm working and constantly and all that stuff. Was it hard to do that, or were you just another example of living the high life at that moment?
Well, I wouldn't call it the high life necessarily, because regular life still goes on. Good things happen, bad things happen, family happens, all these things, you're still, you can't let that be the be all and end all of your life. It's like Nikola Jokic in the recent Denver Nuggets success in the
Yeah.
NBA Finals. He couldn't wait to get home to
Yeah.
serve. He wasn't even going to go to the parade in
Yeah.
Denver. I want to go home, my family, hang out. So it's really the same thing. You can't let that take, but it's obviously a big thing. And if music is a big part of your life and your career that's happening, you do, you can't, you don't totally let it out of your mind. You
Sure.
keep going. So it's a funny thing. In the sessions themselves, you still have to be your part of the session.
Sure.
You have to be, if you're the engineer, that's where you have to be. If you're the producer engineer, that's where you are. And excuse me, it sounds silly to say that, but you can't overthink it. You've got
Sure.
to every day remember why you're there. You've got to show up early if you can, stay late if you will, do your job as good as you can. So I've always been one who doesn't drink or do drugs or go to crazy club things or what after. It's just I like to have fun things, musical fun things,
Sure.
but I've never let other things ruin going into a session the next day. So it's always been an in the moment thing for me. Not basking in it.
Sure.
Even if would go to finish Tres Hombres, and it's their biggest album before any of the others yet, and puts them on a whole different level, touring and everything. When we go in for the next album, you don't think, well, we've done it, it's over now. No, you're still doing your
Yeah.
job. You've got to be there and do. And you're only as good as the last thing you did in any entertainment
Of
industry.
course.
So I mean, you can have if you're a Jack Nicholson and the movies you've done in the last few years aren't the greatest you ever did or whatever, you're still Jack Nicholson, okay. But still, most people who aren't Jack Nicholsons and have a big name like that, you're still only going to get other work or whatever based on almost on the last thing you did.
Yeah.
It's terrible or flops big time, you may not get those calls. So it's all an in the moment thing and just trying your best to do your best.
Of course, as mentioning in your introduction, besides music, you have a love for photography equally as large as your love for music. What is it about photography, though, that gets your groove going, that can help you escape the world of music and work within music?
Yeah, to me, both photography and music creation are art forms. There are a couple of people who will argue they're not art, music's not art, whatever. But in my mind, they are both artistic endeavors in which you are creating something from nothing,
Yeah.
or from not from nothing, but that didn't exist in a recorded or permanent form
Sure.
before you made it, permatized it. That's a
Yeah.
new word. I made that up. But also, as I see, in my mind, they're very different,
Yeah.
as well as being many ways the same, because my brain, in a feeble way, I suppose, can't do both at once.
Sure.
Don't multitask with photography and music. If I am in recording music or writing a song or doing anything like that, I'm not in the least thinking about the photographs or what I might like to take a picture of or whatever. Likewise, if I'm out shooting photos, that's my job that day. I'm not thinking of the song that I'm writing concurrently. It's totally
Yeah.
separate. But they're the same in many ways, because in both instances, you're taking something that you either see before you or hear in front of you, and you're capturing it on film or digitally, or with a microphone on tape or digitally. And then you're either mixing it to put things together in their final form in audio, or you're printing it to get it in its final form that you want it with contrast and whatever you might slightly tweak in a print
Sure.
in photography. So they're both really creative art forms in my mind, but they're very distinct things that I don't
Sure.
mix together. But I love photography equally to music so much, and I'm so honored now that after years and years of music, he's a music guy, blah blah. Okay, that's great, but now to have gallery and museum shows and books that are out there, and people seeing in the photos and recognizing that part of what you do, it's really gratifying to me, because
Of
I've done it
course.
as long as music
Sure.
and as intensely as music,
Sure.
but just never made it a career that I put out for people until I finally released it, I
Yeah,
guess you'd
sure.
say.
Now, besides the MLK photos that you took, which are legendary in of itself, is there any other piece of work from your photography experiences that you're equally, if not more, proud of?
Well, the things I'm most proud of in photography uh, aren't, well, that's hard to say, but the things I really, really deeply feel and love are the things that I see somewhere in public, that's out there in the world somewhere, and I want to come into it, get up to the proper length from it, closeness to it, and take the photograph that isolates it from its surroundings and from the world itself,
Sure.
and how it becomes the individual thing. Now, it might be something that's on the side of a sidewalk on a street somewhere, a sign or anything, and everybody's walking down the sidewalk just the same as I might be, and walking right past it. They don't see it. They don't stop and make it permanent and separate it from its other surroundings and make it something they can go back later and look at again, and other people can look at, and other people might say, hopefully, if you've chosen correctly, might say, oh, that's kind of artistic. I never would have thought that, because you made it so by separating it from the rest of the
Sure.
world. So I forget the question, but I'm just sort of delving into the mindset. It so what's your most proud of? Really, the things I'm most proud of, the Boston Herald. I had an exhibit at a really nice gallery in Boston, uh, and the Boston Herald came and reviewed it, and they called it evocative urban landscapes. So I'm not sure what that is, but I like those things. I like
Sure.
evocative. It means you're drawn to it. I like urban because I'm out there in the urban areas,
Sure.
and landscapes because they are normally aren't thought of as urban things.
Sure.
But somehow tying all these together really struck a nerve with me. I thought, I've never thought of that, but thank you. So,
Sure.
but yes, taking Martin Luther King's near last photos, may have been the last still photos, I don't know, but just hours before he was tragically assassinated. Uh, that was very special, and I really loved them, and the ability to even see them again. I didn't even look at those photos for over 40 years.
Oh, wow.
I just hid them away, because when he was killed, it was like, oh,
Yeah.
and I had to put them in a box. But I finally got them out, and finally agreed to and was able to let the public also share in what I had taken of the photos. But, and I'm very proud of them, yes, but
Sure.
it they happen in a different way. Any portrait, would call those portraits, because I've got other in my collection of photographs and that have been in the exhibits and things that I call the portraits, because they're of a person. They might be a musician on stage, or it might be someone just standing, or it might be Martin Luther King walking down an airport hallway or something next to me. So, but still, as proud as I can be of those, the things not seek, because you don't know what you're looking for until you
Sure.
find it. Things I discover out in the world and choose to isolate the way I was
Sure.
talking about are the things I'm actually the most proud of, because it's kind of like painting.
Okay.
I'm not good with a brush or a canvas or even drawing a stick horse. I'm terrible. But that's my way of painting
Okay.
because I'm taking the camera and positioning it correctly. I'm moving to just the right place. I'm taking one photograph. I'm not taking 15 or 50 or 1,000 around different things. I choose the one way to isolate it. And what Cartier-Bresson, one of my idols, called the decisive moment, in just the very exact, correct moment to make that picture the best piece of art that you can make it, which is painting it with the
Sure.
camera. That's what I like to do. And I hope it doesn't sound grand or
Oh, no, no,
egotistical.
no.
It's just you have to have an ethos of what you're doing to understand what you're doing.
The last question I want to ask you today before we end on a little segment I have, you are very, from what we've said the last hour, which again, thank you so much for doing this, a level-headed, calm guy who's not someone who's overtly bombastic or showing off his skills or achievements and what he's accomplished in life, which in some aspects he should, but in other aspects you're humbled and grounded. At the end of the day, when the history books are written, the lights are shut off, the doors are closed and locked, what do you hope the legacy of Terry Manning is?
Oh, that's so hard because it's rock and roll music,
Yeah.
and not counting the photography. But it's not Winston Churchill saving the Western world. It's not someone discovering a cure for cancer or whatever. It's just rock music.
Yeah.
But if there had to be a legacy, which just sounds pretentious in some way to me, but uh, I guess it's just somebody who did their best
Sure.
to do their best. Now, you say, I totally agree with you, kind of grounded, not bombastic, whatever. Uh, but I hope that doesn't mean boring.
Sure. Yeah. No, no, yeah, of course.
In another way, I think it's very important in this regard. If you're on stage or in the studio, and it's very important. I've made some incredibly raucous, bombastic music, even though I wouldn't call myself a bombastic person, necessarily, as you were saying. And if I'm on stage, when you're in that moment, you got to forget that other stuff.
Sure.
You got to realize why you're there. And if people did pay to come see you, or they're going to pay to buy the product you're working on, they don't want boring. They don't want even tempered, whatever. So you
Sure.
do have to become a bit of an actor. Actor. I say that as a Shakespearean actor would. You have to be an actor,
Sure.
as we say in the South, in a sense. And I think all musicians who do shows, live shows, as a central character, know that and do that. It's
Sure.
just like literally actors in the movies. I do. I've done a lot of ADR work, which
Yeah, yeah.
in movie sound recording is re-recording the dialogue that the actors will say in a movie. And some actors come in and just do their lines as themselves in the movies. What I mean is they do it perfectly as
Yeah.
the character they're portraying, but they stand there and do that. But other actors, and I'm thinking specifically of Nicolas Cage,
Yeah.
I've done several movies with, literally acts it out. He's jumping around, he's throwing things, he's really bombastic in that
Yeah.
moment. Even though just a minute before he said, "Where's the coffee machine?" or what, whatever, like that.
Yeah.
And I remember the very first time I played with bands for years and years and years, and I think it was 2008 was the first time I ever played a show of my own, where I'm the name on the marquee
Sure.
and the band is hired to be my band, and people came to see it because they were seeing me. I had never done that before, even
Sure.
though I'd sung lead on songs in a band, whatever. And I will never forget the very first minute of the spotlight coming on, and the first show I did, which was Memphis Memphis Pop Festival in Memphis. I came back to Memphis to do this, and uh, the very first song, the first time, even though I'd rehearsed with the band and whatever, all of a sudden when that light came on, and we're starting the first song, I was just, oh my God, I am the centerpiece of this.
Yeah.
I was going to just be like I was in the band.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized you're not in the band anymore. You're not in the band. They are supporting you.
Yeah.
I can't just be in the band. So it all of a sudden it just a thing happens in your mind where you're now acting.
Sure.
You're now the centerpiece. So then you become bombastic.
Yeah.
And I do things like jumping. I've had dancing girls on the stage, sides of the stage, and I've jumped around and danced with them and whatever, twirled around with the guitar and done things that I would never do in life. You know, I don't even like to dance, for instance. But so anyway, when you said even and non-bombastic, I did want to get that. There is a bombastic part to anyone
Sure.
who's had success.
But it's controlled to an extent.
Oh yeah, it's controlled.
Yeah. So before we enter today, I want to end on a little segment called the One Word Challenge. So what entails with this is that I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things that have some connection to my guest. This week being the legendary Rockabilly Hall of Famer, class of 2013, International Hall of Famer, Terry Manning. He has to do his best to say a word or two or sentence that best comes to mind when he hears the phrase. So are you ready?
Oh goodness! So you're going to say a phrase, and I have to come to mind something.
Yeah.
Okay.
First one, Texas.
The great republic, the Republic of Texas, the greatest place.
Stack Records.
Stax Records, incredible place with the best musicians ever in recording and incredible singers, and just a place that can't be duplicated ever again.
Photography.
Just one of my biggest loves, capturing the world and scoptophilia at its ultimate.
Music.
Another of my great loves. It's part of the soul. It's in humans. It'll never leave humanity.
Success.
Something we all want. I've been lucky to achieve some of it. We'll never get as much as we wish we had, I guess.
Hard work.
Very important. The biggest part of life.
Bobby Fuller.
Great early guy. What a talent. An early mentor. Love him to death.
Jimmy Page.
Oh, brilliant guy. A philosopher of music. Outstanding guitarist.
And certainly last but never least, and this cosmic universe we all call Earth that we live on now and forever, Terry Manning.
Oh, it's just somebody that's got horses to feed.
that is certainly something. I want to say to you, good sir, thank you so much for coming on this week. It's been a great thrill for you to be as patient and willing to this to share your stories from your life. So again, thanks.
Nolan, I appreciate it. Thank you for your great questions. Well, good to be here.
For you, and I'm sure you mentioned the sessions you worked on during the pandemic in your living room by your TV that you'll be releasing one or two songs down the line. Is there anything that you want people to look out for, work that will be coming out soon, or that you have that is available to the public?
Well, I don't know when it'll come out because my record company helps choose what is released when. But I did a Sofa Sessions version of the EMI song, Smile for Me, that I co-wrote with Alex Chilton and that he did many years ago. So I just did a whole new version of that. So hopefully watch for that in 2023 or before.
I'll definitely looking for it. As I said, there's a lot of material that you did from your solo stuff that is amazing. You covered brilliantly Brian Wilson's mega, if not number one, classic song "God Only Knows" about 10 years ago. That was very good, and I'm a huge Beach Boys fan, so that was a treat to myself finding that. If you enjoy this, because who the heck wouldn't? And down the line, when my guest Terry Manning gets inducted into some other Hall of Fame, not just the International Rockabilly Hall of Fame, you're gonna say, "Oh my gosh, I should subscribe." So subscribe, comment, share all that fun jazz. Follow on social media. Twitter, Nolan Cart Night Show, and Instagram, the Nolan Cart Night Show. In the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean of Talk, so certainly like this one, I bid you all a heartfelt good night.